Hello there. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing okay. I would want to say I'm doing wonderful, but some ear issues. But other than that, I'm doing semi wonderful.
I wonder, should I like mute my enthusiasm for talking to you? Because I'm trying not to like burst your other eardrum in the course of this conversation, ideally. Fingers
Thank
crossed.
you, thank you.
But all right. So for anybody who doesn't know, Aicha Manai, she's fantastic. She's actually CEO of Startup Refugees, and it's an organization that works with the inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers into the Finnish professional life. And I get to see so many of the events they're represented in, so many things that they're working towards, and the whole range of people that get incorporated to be able to share their stories, to be able to open doors for others, to be able to train people to build their own doors of opportunities. I love that. And so thank you for sharing time to be able to talk about what you know.
Thank you, Laura. I have to say that this is like one of the very few times that a person has described startup refugees like so eloquently and so well. Thank you. I love that. Startup refugees, it's like an NGO and they do something with refugees and I guess with other migrants and but you just like loved it. Thank you. Good pitch.
Hey, and I have to say, I also appreciate just your character in this. Like, so it's not just you are concerned about these groups and such. You're actually doing something, and you're investing a lot of your personal time and your professional time significantly to be able to solve some very real problems. Um, and I know this is not just coming out of nowhere. Like you will often say that yes, this is a product. You're a product of a multicultural and like this multilingual environment yourself. So you are Finnish though, right?
Yes, I'm Finnish and Tunisian.
Aha, yes.
Yeah.
So you have some experience with not just the Finnish context, which sometimes I meet a lot of people who are change makers in the space who are doing a lot of great things, but they may not have an experience of being othered in a place, you
Mm,
know?
mm,
And I think that perspective can really, really help if you're trying to build something called inclusion or if you're trying to build it out, like, or to affect things like integration in a place. It's hard to understand the areas where exclusion can happen if you don't have connections to people personally who might have experienced that, you know?
100%. 100%. It opens your eyes to obviously the inequalities that we have in our society. But when you live in a bubble and you're not aware of those things, I feel that's when we get the questions of, well, I've never experienced racism. I have a brown friend and they've had a really nice life here in Finland. That's when you get those comments. And then you're like, okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm. I was just talking to somebody about that today, and one thing I have to say, it's not like anyone's trying to say that your perception of reality is not valid for you. No one's ever saying that. But I think I would just like people to understand that it's very, very possible that different people have different experiences,
Exactly.
and that, there can be these simultaneous realities that are
Mhm.
coexisting within the space. Yes, Finland can be the happiest place on earth for some people.
Mhm.
And yes, it can be a place of disillusionment and exclusion for others. And I think that's something that I would like more people to understand that they can both be true and we can actually help to change some of that reality to make it a better place for more people?
Indeed, indeed. Because I feel that sometimes the statement that I mentioned, like I have a brown friend who's never experienced racism, or a brown person or a person from a minority saying that they've never experienced racism or discrimination, it's sort of used as like a weapon to just make you shut up. Like I say it, therefore that's the reality. But like you said, if the reaction would be more like, okay, I'm willing to listen and to hear your point of view, while still sticking to my truth but still understanding that my truth is not the only truth, and I wish like all of society would operate more in that way. We would learn a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many different experiences of people who come to Finland, right? You're specializing with like refugees and asylum seekers. And of course, there are migrants of all types and such. So I would be an immigrant that came for, family reasons. And that's a very, very different reality. And it's kind of interesting because sometimes people will try to like pull on me as being like a quote a model minority situation because there are certain levels of comfort that I can bring because I,
Mm,
I speak a language that they had to learn in school. So like that's the linguistic familiarity, right? And then there's cultural familiarity. I come from the States, and I went to like a good school they know the name of, and that sort of thing. So like there are these things that make me kind of familiar to people and less scary, and thus I'm kind of a good immigrant, even though I'm brown, in that sense, and that's a
Mhm.
weird thing that I hate gets weaponized and spun in different ways to say, ha, look at this person. This person is succeeding. Why can't you? Kind of thing.
Mhm.
Very, very different realities people can have.
Yeah, there's a lot of this good immigrant rhetoric in Finland, I feel. For example, in 2022, when we had what 40,000 Ukrainians who fled the war, and
Mm,
they came to Finland, and I remember in those days like talking to employers, and they were saying like, "Oh, look at these Ukrainians. They're like coming and knocking on our doors and asking for work, and they're so interested and they really want to like enter the labor market fast." And then I'm like, yeah, you do realize that people under temporary protection are actually legally allowed to go to work. But if you come as an asylum seeker, you can't. You have to wait 3 to 6 months. That they don't want to
yeah.
see that there's actually reasons to certain behavior patterns happening. But it's much easier to just paint this picture of, oh, Ukrainians are like this and all other refugees are like that. So
Mm,
for sure.
yeah. So I saw a lot of people shaping narratives around this in ways that were so polarizing. It's the whole idea of, once again, the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant. These are the people that you should care about. Other folks, they're very different from you. Maybe they're not the focus of our attention. It's a bit further away. Um, and you have to think about these are all human beings. We're all, these are all human beings trying to make their way in the world, trying to survive, trying to have safety for their families, trying to have something to look forward to, professional lives and things like this. And I don't know if there's anybody that's more deserving or less deserving of basic human dignity. It's a thing.
Yeah, that's why I don't know, like the situation that we had was it last year when we
Mm,
had asylum seekers in the border, and we were talking about this hybrid influencing that Russia is trying to influence Finland by sending these people to the border. And I've always thought like, what if the Finnish response would have just been like, okay, due process, you're allowed to seek asylum in Finland. Let's check the cases and let's follow like the law and see what happens. I wonder if that would have like sent a shock to Russia's system because obviously they got what they wanted. What happened was that we spent months talking about the bicycles, talking about the people, closing the border, talking about how we need to close the border fast. We need to build a wall. We need to do this and that. And I just wonder, like, if our response would have been different, would the result have been different? I don't know,
mm,
but it's just something that I've thought about quite often. I mean, I
yeah.
I think globally, I mean, in the States, in France, in Germany, in the UK, in Tunisia, in my other home country, like the discussion about asylum seekers and immigrants, I don't think it's ever been as active as it is right now. And I feel like like you said, they're all human beings. But what we want to, we've started to use this rhetoric about these people who are coming for different reasons. And we started to use like this war rhetoric with them. I don't know if you know what I mean. Like we're using this rhetoric that this is 100% only a threat that is coming. And there is
Mm,
someone doing something in the sort of like background to make these things happen. And there's all these conspiracy theories versus like really taking a look in the mirror and thinking, I wonder what like hundreds of years of imperialism and colonization and purposely keeping certain areas of the world as poor and pushing them down,
mm,
that at one point it's going to start bubbling over. But we don't want to have that discussion. We would rather focus on the threats and this and that and how we need to shut the borders and build the walls as if that's the answer, when 100% it's not going to be the answer. People have always been moving from one place to another. There's
mm,
always been different reasons, and it's not going to end anywhere. You can build all the walls you want. People will find a way to climb those walls. We have to get to like the root causes, but I don't think as a society globally, for example, Western countries, we're not ready to talk about those at all.
mm.
Some people
Well,
are, but the majority isn't.
But when you start talking about that, then people start thinking about accountability and responsibility and things like this. And then that's something where people feel obliged to do something. It puts people in the point of action when
Hmm.
you start having that awareness. So if you have awareness and empathy, then you're going to then have action, right? That comes
Very
afterwards.
true.
If people are not prepared for action or they don't feel that's a thing, then you're going to see that empathy decreasing and they're going to avoid the awareness as well. So these are things where I would say it's a challenge to get people to care who don't feel like they're at a point of actually giving a care, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and maybe a big question is going to be how do we get people to feel that caring is not going to take away from their bandwidth for their everyday survival, for their future, for their growth. It's not going to diminish that. I would love for people to be able to realize that people that they're afraid of a lot of times. They think of people as folks who are going to come in and take, but not really understand what those people are capable of. They're people, and people will enrich your life in many different ways if you let them. Um, and this is not to put it in terms of the capitalistic mindset of everybody has to create value for
Mm.
you, but I think it's a very skewed way to look at people when you only think of them as human liabilities, you know?
Yeah.
And not understand that these folks have somehow managed to make it through sometimes very horrendous situations in life, right? And that kind of ingenuity, that kind of being able to make things happen, to be able to survive and make a life flourish in some ways, regardless of hardships or in the face of hardships, that's a mentality that we could definitely take something from here and we could definitely learn from and benefit from if we give people the opportunity to apply it in more positive ways, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I was in this podcast too. No, last week it was for Kauppalehti, and we were talking about immigration and how Finland needs international talents. Dotty dotty. We've heard this so many times. We need 40,000 net immigration per year so that the Finnish economy can maintain and grow, and etc. And then we
Mm.
were talking about this point-based system that now certain organizations have started lobbying for a point-based system, and they have these like certain hierarchies, and you get points based on work experience and based on if you've had a company and different things. And I thought it was like interesting. I'm like, okay, good, we have some new ideas to the immigration discussion. But what I felt is like funny because what you just said right there, I said like kind of the same thing, like how come we are not understanding that people who leave countries like, I don't know, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, North Africa, they risk their lives for a better life somewhere else, like the amount of resilience, strength, a strategy it actually needs to get here is something that we should be in awe of and be like, hey,
Absolutely.
how can we use all of that and support this person and the potential that they obviously have? They made it here. It's not like they pressed a button and got here. They actually worked hard to get to this place. Then maybe we should actually understand that this type of resilience is exactly what a country with a diminishing economy would need. But instead, we make it seem like it's a big threat to everyone's security. And you know, while I say this, I'm not naive. Like, of course, I understand that I think every sort of phenomenon in the world, capitalism, immigration, whatever, stocks, markets, everything has a good side and a bad side. Like, uh, I am very pro immigration and I am very pro open borders, but I still understand that when there is new people coming in somewhere, that there is the sort of negative effects, but those negative effects happen anyway, like within ourselves, within our own communities, within you and I, you know, that it's not like something that only happens when there is immigration. So therefore, I don't think we can like cancel out immigration because there can be and is certain negative effects.
Well, one thing I always think about, I mean, this is, and I work primarily from this point of like companies and organizations
Mm.
as opposed to the societal level when it comes to like doing research and things. But one thing I always think about is people talk about the benefits of diversity. And they're like, yes, diversity is fantastic, great, you know, and you get those people who are pro diversity and such. And I definitely I would lend my voice to that. But I also have to say that diversity without inclusion is actually usually quite negative for most parties involved in that sense. So I I love that, yes, it can be absolutely the best thing in the world. It can be significantly, positive, and you're going to have better performance, better outcomes from a financial standpoint, et cetera, if you have diversity and inclusion. But if you don't have that inclusion, it really can be a liability. So this is a thing where I do want people to think about, yes, yay, we do want to have different kinds of immigrants coming in. We do want to make certain that we are welcoming of the refugees and asylum seekers that come in, as well as, as people. But we have to understand that we need to accommodate and we have to support
Mhm.
them. And we can't just like drop people in here into a different country and be like, oh, you know,
Take
where's
care
the
of
where's the
yourself.
bonus? Like kind of thing. That
Mhm.
doesn't quite work out. So I
I mean, we've
think,
seen it doesn't work out. Like you're an
yeah.
asylum seeker, you live in a reception center 3, 4 years,
Mm,
surrounded by four walls. You have nothing to do, basically. You have no idea where your process is going, when you're gonna get like the call for an interview, and when they're gonna start handling your like asylum seeking process.
mm,
What the result is, will it actually be handled fairly? Because we know that there's a lot of cases when we've had poor translators and a lot of things have gone wrong, especially in the 2015-2016 era.
mm,
But so we have a person sitting in a reception center for an X amount of time.
mm,
There's no inclusivity. There's no asking this person to take part in any. I think the situation is a bit better now, but I remember like almost 20 years ago, I used to work as an interpreter. So I would go to reception centers and I would be the interpreter in these info sessions. So there would be people who have just come in from different Arab countries, and then they have an info session. And then there's a group of people from Somalia and people from Afghanistan. Everyone has their own interpreter. And then we're like interpreting to them, like, yes, in Finland, the system goes like this. You get a 200 euro subsidy from the government, and
mm,
this is
mm,
lunch, like these regular things. But that was
mhm,
it. That's
mm,
all like the interaction that they had was just an interpreter
mm,
coming. They lived in the reception center. Yes, they had the people who lived with them and who worked with them, who were sort of their touch to Finnish society. But other than that, there was nothing that would make them feel like, hey, this is potentially your new home. What can we
mm.
do to make you feel like you are actually part of this? Absolutely nothing. So if this goes on for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4, 5 years, then the person finally gets an asylum. They're allowed to stay in Finland. So they spent 4 or 5 years living in the reception center, doing something to spend their days. And then they're supposed to be like active, engaged citizens. It doesn't work like that. And this is one of the reasons that Startup Refugees was born in the first place. Like, hey, instead of having people waste away in these reception centers, let's do something. Let's
Mm,
talk with them. Let's open up a line of communication. Let's discuss together, like, what are their wants, their wishes, their dreams? What do they know? What's in their like bag of skills? What do they want to do in the new country that they're in? And then try and find the opportunities. It doesn't always work perfectly, but most of the time it actually does. And then we find like little opportunities for one person, two people, and now it's almost 2,000 people almost 10 years later. And all it took was like someone to come up with an idea. In this case, it was Riku and Tunna, these mad venture, doc ventures, media personalities, to come up with an idea and realize, hey, we're two Finnish guys. Like, we're not going to be able to do this. We need to invite people from the community. And that's what they did. They invited people because in 2015, the majority of asylum seekers came from the Middle East. So they invited people from the Middle Eastern community living in Finland to join forces and together start doing something. And I wish, like, if we would have this type of an attitude towards immigration in general, I'm sure like the feeling of people who have come to Finland from somewhere else and their feeling of belonging would be something completely different than it is
yeah.
right now.
Honestly, I was just thinking about when it comes to how Finland is approaching immigration in general. It's just this fact of they will make certain that people have a place to stay, right? Kind of. That's kind of the gist. Like you can get into the country possibly, but the idea is it takes more than a place to stay to have a home, you know? And there's so much more that goes into it that I think gets neglected at every single level when it comes to us thinking about how do we support immigration here. When they bring in people for businesses, they might have families that come with them. They've brought these people who have to figure out how to navigate how to be in this country as well. They forgot to think about, oh, what about the spouse that came with them? What about those kids that came with them?
Mm.
They need something to have it be a home. When you let folks in, you let in the body, great, but what about the person? You have to think about how
Exactly,
do
well
you
said. Yeah.
accommodate, the humanity of people. And that's a harder thing. And you're right, there's no way that that problem can get solved by just a couple Finnish guys doing this, but
Mhm.
you have to involve the people who are actually directly impacted by that to help shape solutions. So I love any kind of initiative that's doing that in that kind of inclusive way.
Mm.
So yes, it's a good company to work for, yours. Very
Yes.
glad you're doing that.
Yeah, we're celebrating 10 years this year, actually. So,
Whoop, whoop,
yeah.
whoop.
And I mean, because I've always also been like, I've been a fan of startup refugees because I'm like, that's exactly what Finland needs.
Mhm.
But then I started working for startup refugees 2 years ago. But I've been like an advisory board member since 2018, 19. But
Mhm.
other than that, but it's really been like a pleasure to enter. And for the first time, I mean, like I said, I'm born in this country, Finnish, Tunisian, grew up in a very multicultural area in Espoo,
Mhm.
and but my work life, like the
Mhm.
places that I've worked in, have been very white and very Finnish, and even though I'm white, I've always been like the odd one out, like the weird chick who talks Arabic on the phone and is really loud and who does Ramadan and is Muslim but doesn't wear a scarf, and she goes to this random country every year, like, and that's always caused these situations at work where I feel like my identity has been questioned. Like, oh, you
Mhm.
fast? What's this fasting thing? Why can't you eat? Oh, go and eat under the table so Allah doesn't see you. Like all these ridiculous comments, or someone asking me, like, oh, so your parents are divorced, right? I remember this was in like one of my first work. I'm like, what? Because you said that your dad is Tunisian. I'm like, yeah. Like, what does that mean? It's just, usually these monikulttuuriset marriages don't work out. I'm like, who says that to like a 20-year-old? Like, what the hell? I'm like, actually, my
Yeah.
parents are together. What a strange and bizarre comment of you to make. But yeah, that you've gotten all these like weird, microaggressions, and then just like blatant racist things happen. People asking like, oh, so what's your take on like Saudi Arabia and how they treat women there? Like, well, I'm Tunisian. Tunisia is in North Africa. We are actually not affiliated with Saudi Arabia, but maybe go and Google like the situation in Saudi Arabia. I don't know what to tell you. But then when I entered startup refugees and I'm in this like working environment, even though we could also still be more diverse, but still in like a very diverse working environment where no one questions the fact that I speak Arabic or that I'm Muslim or that I fast Ramadan, or like it's just a normal thing. No one makes it into anything. And first time I was 37 when I started working at, and that was like my first time in my whole like history of working in Finland that I actually felt like I belong somewhere. And it's a very like strange situation to find yourself in after all that time. Even though, yes, I feel like I belong to Finland and I have a wonderful group of friends and all of that, but I'm speaking from like a professional point of view. And yes, I've had nice work friends and everything. I don't want to make it seem like all of
We're
my
not
past
tearing
jobs
down your
are
former
horrible.
colleagues. I'm
But
sure
you
they're
know what I
wonderful.
mean? You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like that finally
Yeah.
you're in a place that you're not like your identity and your value and belief system isn't questioned. It's just a
Mm.
part of this bigger group of other values and other identities and ways of life.
That is massive. That's a massive
Mm.
thing. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to create that. It's hard to find that here. And I appreciated your take in terms of your ways of trying to build out integration and inclusion by sponsoring entrepreneurship, because in some ways, I think it's actually easier to create a company or create a professional environment that can cater to different, things than it is to somehow change or transform a pre-existing thing. So I I mean, someone told me once, like Finland is full of space, and that's the advantage of Finland. It's geographically full of space. It's in many ways, in terms of opportunity, is kind of full of space in some ways. But you have to be the person to build the thing. If you want something, you can create in that space something that you want. Not so easy as this person indicated, by the way, but there's a possibility to create a space for oneself that's a little bit easier in some ways than going into certain spaces and trying to feel welcomed or accommodated in that, unfortunately. But this is just being pragmatic when it comes to like looking at different companies and researching them.
Oh, but you
I,
have a
yeah.
very, very valid point. And I mean, one of the reasons there's all this talk about how immigrants, especially, are starting new companies. And in
Mm.
Vantaa, Helsinki, Espoo, like almost half of the new companies are started by people of an immigrant background or people who have come to Finland from abroad.
Mm.
And then, which is awesome and great. And yes, we want to have new businesses and new ideas and all of that. But like the root cause quite often is that these people have tried and tried and tried to knock on Finnish workplaces and no one is opening the doors. But now they are creating the workplaces and they are
Mm.
the ones in charge. Some of them with small businesses, but we've also seen amazing stories of people who like are actually employing Finns or employ,
Yeah,
that like the
absolutely. Yeah.
landscape is changing. And what I always like to say when I go and talk about like diversity issues in companies is like, hey, you kept the door closed for too long, that now
Mm.
we're starting our own thing. And soon you guys are going to be running after us. And we're already like somewhere over there. And I can see that already happening in like certain
Yeah.
fields in Finland.
One of my favorite companies that I got a chance to work with is actually a startup company, helping them with their like DEI strategy.
Mm,
First, I love startup companies that are looking at how can we build inclusion and, make certain that we have support for different groups of people that we have. At the early stage, they're like a 30-person company, Hyperion Robotics, founded by immigrants. And they have like 30 people and 20 different nationalities in there. And they are at a point where, they're hiring Finns too. But the fact is they started off with people from everywhere. And that's a thing where that's a part of their DNA. So they're,
mm,
making certain that as they grow and as they scale and go to different markets, they're actually trying to make certain that they can replicate inclusion as they go for different groups, and different realities that they're going to encounter in different places. So I like companies with that degree of intentionality to it. And it's very doable. It's a very possible
yeah.
thing.
And the fact that they're already thinking about it in the beginning
Hmm.
versus like expanding everywhere and then being like, oh shit, things are not going well. We need to hire Laura, come and help us. Like that they actually
But no, seriously,
realize.
I get brought in oftentimes when there is something that's happened. Like, so
Mm,
we do an auditing service for a lot of different companies, and we work oftentimes with like VCs, and sometimes just with angel investors who are doing due diligence on organizations. And what happens is companies are going for rounds of funding and they have to, make certain that they're not investing in a liability in some ways. They want to make certain the company can grow, that it can scale. They have a financial motivation to be able to see what's going on with this. And they typically will call it a company like mine when there's something that's happened. Like maybe there's a sexual harassment complaint. Maybe there is something where the ombudsman for, non-discrimination has kind of gotten involved, or they might have gotten some complaints about this particular company. Or maybe there's something where, there's a question about the pay equity. Some people are bringing up questions about these kind of things and such. As at the point where there is a problem that's a known problem, as opposed to being proactive, which is something I would love for companies to think about. Because after you have a situation where you have, an organization where you have neglected well-being for so long, or you've neglected inclusion and support for people for so long that you have folks hospitalized for burnout, you've got people who are, have contemplated suicide and things like this, etc. Um,
yeah.
and that's the point that you're at. You can't just kind of walk that back and say, oh, by the way, different company today. It doesn't quite go like that. There's lots of work to try to change a culture. And
Yes.
so I want companies to think about how can you be intentional about that in your in the DNA of your company at an earlier stage. That way, when it's replicating, you've replicated inclusion. You've replicated something that's a good, sustainable thing that's going to be able to help people thrive and to help your organization as it grows. But if you don't think about that, it's entirely possible that you are just going to be, replicating convenience. And that convenience in the Finnish context is you lean very heavily on familiarity, the people that you know, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you only have a couple million people in your country, you're going to run out of the people that you know who are really competent in something, people that you know who are really good at being able to support and lead different people. You got to think about how can you support people from different places and how can you bring in insight from other folks before you get to that point where you've run out of and exhausted your options from that local context,
Mm.
There's so much out there in the world that we can learn from and we can grow from it and we can benefit if we grow with these people. But I think there is that fear of change and the fear of the unknown for a lot of people.
I would say definitely fear of change and fear of the unknown. That's like the 100%, 100% agree with that. And I feel like, well, this is probably not just a Finnish thing, but companies in general, you sort of think like, oh, like you've worked with startups. For example, in startups that you have this like we have a cool lounge and I don't know, a granola bar every morning for everyone, and they can go and have yogurt and granola, and they can play basketball or pool or whatever, and
Uh,
have these like gimmicky things which are nice. I mean, I would love to have a granola bar at our office if someone would sponsor
we are
us.
not anti granola here,
We
okay?
are not
It's fine. No.
anti-granola. But like you have all of these things, but then the actual sense of belonging and inclusion is not there.
Mm,
And I doubt that anyone will just stay for the granola bar. And like, yes, you can replicate that to 100 different countries, but if you don't have the actual like processes and the culture intact, then it's not gonna work.
that's
Yeah.
a thing. It's a shame. Here's the thing. So thinking at like the societal level, we talk about inclusion. I often think of it from a company level, and it's easier to define it and shape it and change it when you have a smaller kind of unit where you only have like 1,000 people or 10,000 people, etc. You can think about that, but you're working at like building inclusion and like belonging at a societal level, and that is a massive undertaking. It's not like the simplest of things to do. So I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Um, so one, how are you defining inclusion at that point, at that level?
Mm,
And also, when we start talking about like integration, um, how are you defining that? Because
mm,
those are two different things,
yes.
and people have such different definitions of it. I kind of want to know what you're working with.
Yeah. That's actually a really good question because we've sort of started replacing the word integration with inclusion.
Hmm.
And the thing is, we can't be 100% sure that everyone that we've supported to find a job actually feels included in their job. But what we want to do and what we sort of, for us, like, what does inclusion mean? At Startup Refugees, inclusion means that you can show up every day authentically as who you are. You're not afraid. You don't have to like cover anything in yourself or in what you say or how you interact with other people. And you feel like there is a place for me in this group. No matter how diverse and different the group is from you personally, you still feel like I'm part of this puzzle and this group of people. That to me is like what inclusion is. And what we want to do is have Finland in like as a whole, as Finnish society, that we would have more inclusive places of work, and that the people that we support to go and work in the open job market, that they feel included. And how that happens is not always that straightforward. Like we have a lot of discussions with the employers that hire through us. We make sure that we share similar values, and this has been quite difficult because sometimes we might be working with companies that are in a field that maybe isn't 100% aligned with our values. For
Hmm.
example, let's say that not each company that we have supported people to go and work with are entirely like carbon neutral and green. They're not. There is like, or some people we've supported, they go and work in, I don't know, clothing stores, and there's, like you can find sort of problematic elements in, well, every company probably. But we still
Hmm.
try and have the discussion that for us, obviously the main goal is that this person who has come to Finland and has been here for 3 months or 3 years, that they find a path to start building a meaningful professional life for themselves. And that path has to start from somewhere. And what we want to do is make sure that the first workplace that they enter to, even though it maybe not be perfect, it maybe doesn't represent everything that this person has for like always dreamt about in their lives, but at least that the place of work realizes that this person who is now entering this place of work comes from a background of XYZ. Not that the background would like define their whole life, but as an example, we each person that we support in employment, we go through this working life in Finland training where we discuss very openly, like, even though it's kind of hard to explain what is Finnish work life because every company is different, but the general things like the legalities, the responsibilities, the rights, certain things that are very common in Finland. For example, it is quite common in Finland that you don't, call your boss, you call them by their name, and like these certain things that are sort of mainstream and stereotypical to Finnish work culture. So we go through those as much as we can so that the person has like an awareness of what is Finnish work life. And then we also go over these things with the employer. Like, hey, this person is an asylum seeker. They don't know yet if they can actually stay in this country. Be very mindful that you are now hiring an asylum seeker. And this means that they might actually get a negative decision and have to leave the country. This person's family is not with them, they are alone here. This can affect their mood. This can have like certain impact on their performance. Be mindful of that. Like there has to be that discussion and realization on both sides, that so that the employer can do everything that they can to make the person feel welcome and understand that, okay, I have to be mindful of certain things and like do everything that they can to make the person feel welcome. And that also means that the employer, I believe, has the responsibility, if for especially if entering like a small company, let's say there's like 12 employees and everyone is from the same city somewhere in, I don't know, northern Ostrobothnia, and now they're hiring like one person who is an asylum seeker from, let's say, Afghanistan, and has only been in Finland for a few months, doesn't speak Finnish, speaks a bit of English, whatever the situation is, that the employer can't just come in one day and be like, hey, welcome, now here's your new colleague. There has to be like discussion in the place of work as well. Like, are we really the type of workplace, our jokes and how we interact during our coffee break or during our teams meeting or whatever, is it the type of place that anyone could just pop in and feel that they are part of it, or does it really require the person to like dig their way into being a part of our group? So having those discussions is really important.
Here's something I would, I was just thinking about as you're talking about this. Beyond the cultural sides of things, there's a lot of just like the ways of working kind of things and the expectations people have that I see companies doing so much better when they are clear and explicit about this, the expectations people have coming in, no matter what kind of team you have or where people are coming from. When you can define what do you need from your work, what are you expecting, from your communication, how do you prefer to get feedback, what kind of feedback, how do you want to give this, what's the best way to be able to to contact you, what's the best way to be able to collaborate with you, are there some things that we should know in terms of, are you a hugger, are you a person with a hands off kind of person, are you, these are things that when you can get that clarified up front. I oftentimes will work with companies and we'll have a how to work with me document, and it's
Oh,
a
that's
thing that,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's something you can do with all the team. And it's something that, even when you talk about the most homogenous teams culturally, there's a lot of things, personality, there could be neurodiversity, there could be lots of different things that
Yes.
people were like, "Ooh, I didn't realize that didn't work for you," and you get that awareness, and that helps people understand it's not just adjusting for that person that you see as different in that sense, but it's adjusting how you work for more people to make sure that how you work actually works really,
Yeah.
for the team that you have. And the clearer you can get, the more likely you are to be able to have a successful team that you could actually adjust and support and be able to thrive together. Um, but it takes awareness. And I love when companies are willing to actually become aware about what
Mm,
each person on that team is going to need, you know?
exactly. And then it sort of takes away from the trouble that might happen afterwards. So being
Absolutely.
like very straightforward in the beginning, like you said, like setting the expect. I love this, like how to work with me document. That's like a really, really cool idea. I mean, we don't have that in use, but maybe we should actually have it. I think it
Hey,
sounds quite
happy
cool.
to share. Yeah.
Yeah.
But these are things where I think, it comes down to understanding the comprehensive needs of the person.
Hmm.
So, one thing I realize is that people have different goals when it comes to like being in a different country and being a different company, right? They have very different goals about what that experience should be like.
Hmm.
And I always find it really an odd thing when companies are like, hey, we want people to be like this and to feel like that. And as a researcher, I find it really interesting when people are talking like, we want everybody to score like a 5 on belonging out of 5, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of funny because when you talk to people about that particular term, belonging, the definitions vary so much, right? A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't want to feel that they belong to work or at
Hmm.
work. They feel like their life is outside. They come to work, they do the thing, and then after 4:30, 5 o'clock, they leave, and that's not their life. And
Yeah.
so for them, their target goal is like a 3 out of 5, because that's what they're
Mm-hmm.
aiming for. And so they don't want to feel like we're family and all that kind of stuff. That's not for them. So there are different goals that people have about the target relationship that you should have, or the target kind of expectations that you should have for the interactions, the communication, and all those things. And you can't assume that everybody's shooting for the same thing. Um, I like when we're aware of those differences and when we could take that into account as we're scoping what our collective and overarching targets are going to be. How can we support inclusion or integration and these kind of things if we have this singular idea of what that should look like? And that's not
Yeah.
going to be everybody's idea,
Yeah.
you know?
That's a really good point, what you said about like that. What does belonging actually mean? Like when I talk about feeling a sense of belonging at work, I don't, to me, it's not like that work is your life. Just that when
Mm,
you are at work, you feel like you can belong to that place of
mm,
work. But that's actually well said that maybe to some people, work actually is like the family, and it is, and you want that work feels like it's everything, like the community. And I know like some people, for example, they have a really like tight knit team, and every day they go for after work and they do all these things, and I'm like, I have two kids and a husband and all this crap I need to do. Like, can't be doing that all the time. Like, we are different. So
yeah.
realizing that maybe not everyone is into the afterworks, and some people just want to, or like someone wants to come to the office every day from 9 to 5. I very much prefer not to go to the office every day. I would rather be at home, but because obviously as the CEO, I have to go and be together with our staff members and everything. But I think like the employer has a big responsibility in really, you can't always accommodate for every single need that will like drain you out, but
Mm,
try and build, like, not systems, but try and build, well, maybe they are systems that actually allow for this
mm,
flexibility to occur, so that you don't force everyone to like fit the exact same mold, and everyone has to, like, we don't have that everyone has to be at the office these 3 days a week. And because I know many companies are
mm.
using these types of tools, and I don't know if they're that effective in the end.
I'm a big fan of flexibility. I think you're going to get more people and you're going to be able to retain people longer. Because let's say, for instance, if you started off where you were a single person in your 20s when you joined the company and you're like, yes, work is my life. I love it. Fantastic. This is my family, my best friends. We hang out all the time. And then let's say you partner up with somebody and you have kids later on. Your life could change completely. Should there still be a place for you? Have you sometimes people think of aging out of a culture and such, or they'll age out of a company in that sense. Do you have to age out of your employment? Is that a thing that needs to happen in that sense? Is there a place for different types of people? That's a
Mhm.
thing that I wish companies would just be transparent about. It may not be that you can actually accommodate everybody at first, but think about what you can do. Like, is it absolutely essential that everybody has to come in? I personally find, I mean, there's a lot of benefit to that, yes, to coming in. There's a lot of benefits for remote working. I think
Mm.
it's a team-based decision as opposed to it being like a company-wide
Yes,
decision by and
yes.
large. And I think some teams could be really well set up and accommodated to be like a remote team, and some teams could be a hybrid team, and some teams could be like fully there based off the dynamics of that team. But once again, it comes down to, can they work well together? And can they, what's the best way for that team to thrive towards their goals? And
Mm.
I really think that should be at that level as opposed to at the organizational level. Um, but that's my
I'm very
particular
happy to
observation.
hear that because that's what we have. We have like
Mm,
each team decides on their own, like what is their best way? Do they want
mm.
to have office days or not? And
Yeah,
people just go with that. And it's worked well so far. So yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
So I think it's an important thing to understand that, yeah, the target of the experience is going to be very, very different. And I I really hope that, in your organization, I really kind of want to know what it is that you're shooting for, because what you're saying that like you're working towards the inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers,
Mm.
like what's the target then that you're going for? Like what's
That
that
we,
look
that we
like?
don't no longer exist. That's like actually like the long-term goal is that startup refugees doesn't exist. That like Finland already works so inclusively that when
Mhm.
people come here, no matter what the reason, they like find places of work, they can pursue their professional goals. Workplaces are very equipped, employers are very savvy and understanding, and they know how to build inclusive workplaces. So the end goal really honestly is that startup refugees doesn't exist. But for now, the goal is that we would be able to bring this model that we have for, we say, like the fast inclusion of migrants to the labor market. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's not, to have it in more places than it is now. We are, I would say, almost nationwide, but we mostly work in the capital region and then in the north of Finland. And then we have some activities in like Tampere region. So ideally, like the goal would be that we would be all over the country. Why not even in the Nordics?
Okay, I
Yeah,
love
because
this.
we
Fingers
want to, like,
crossed.
we've been trying to flip the narrative for 10 years and it hasn't succeeded yet. But trying to flip the narrative of who, like, when we talk about international talents, like, who are we talking about? Who are these international talents? Usually they're like German engineers or something like that. That's what we mean by international talents. And we want to have people who come to Finland as refugees and asylum seekers to be included in the discussion of the international, even though I don't even like the term to begin with. But since we are using that term, I would very much want refugees and asylum seekers to also be part of this group and not to be seen as people we need to like pity and sort of talk down to
Mm,
and have this very like nurturing type of like look, or then have this, oh, these are the enemy, don't come here. It's like one of those two, but instead just look at these people as people. And usually people want to contribute and people want to be seen no matter what the background is, and we should have a society that's able to do that to everyone.
okay, so what do you think is the missing thing? The reason why we are getting hung up on this still? It's been 10 years, that I've almost been here. And Fighter Refugees has been around for around the same time. What do you think is the thing that could change not just the narrative around this, but also the reality?
I think for sure that we would have people in power and decision makers leading by example, and we would have people sitting in parliament who would come. I mean, I think we've had one member of parliament who came to Finland as a refugee and who had made the mistake of making very foolish comments when he was younger, and his career was basically torn down, and that was it. And then we had one other MP who came to Finland as a refugee and then was not, uh, or actually maybe they will be reelected, who knows, but for the time being has not been reelected. So we definitely need more representation. in parliament, in big corporations, in media, everywhere. Like, I think representation has a lot to do with changing narratives and changing people's attitudes. But how do we get to representation when there's no inclusion is another thing. Like, we have to first start like changing our thought processes in order to be able to actually increase the representation. So
Okay. So, short of running for parliament, what is something you think that anybody could actually do to make the situation better for different people around them right now?
I mean, be kind to each other. Like, very, very simple things. Like, I think my friend is actually now in Tunisia, and she just sent me this picture of her baby. She's also Tunisian, and she has a 1 year old, and she sent a picture of her baby with all these. They're in a grocery store, and all these like people working at the grocery store are like surrounding her daughter. There's like five of them. And then she sent it to me, and I sent back, like, this is the thing I always miss when I'm in Finland. That, unfortunately, I don't know what would be the thing to change this, but I feel like we don't have this culture of like seeing each other. Like, we don't see each other at the bus stop, in the store, at the railway station. We just like pass each other everywhere. We like to talk to people's dogs, but we don't like to talk to people's kids or babies. That's like, ooh, don't come near me. So I wish like these small steps, like, say hi to your neighbor and just start practicing this culture of like seeing each other. And then maybe we'll get to the inclusion and get to the representation and then get to like the actual change happening.
Okay. Seeing, caring, empathy, and action. That's a lovely trajectory of things here. Um, I am asking everybody this one question, and I would love to get your take on it. Just to be able to pass this on to anybody who is, maybe they're working in your field, they're working in some other field, and they're trying to overcome some very hard days. It can be hard work, trying to make a positive change. What is a thing that gives you hope on the hardest days?
Well, to me, it's my kids, but um, I think just like reaching out to someone who cares about you, and then that, like, not everyone is dead inside. There are people, because sometimes this work can feel like you are battling these like visible and invisible obstacles all the time,
Uh-huh.
and you get really frustrated, and you feel like, I don't know, you feel that there are so many like things hindering your way to progress. But then you get so much like energy and love and warmth and fuzziness from just like having a chat with someone that cares about you and you care about them. And just that like 3 minute talk or voice message or whatever gives you like a really nice pickup, and then you're like, okay, now I'll start fighting the obstacles again. Yeah.
I am going to wish you all the best success in your fight. Keep up the good fight with all these things and such,
Thank you, Lauren.
for you and your organization. And what's the best way for anybody to be able to support you and to be able to support startup refugees?
uh, there's two ways. Number one is, if you feel like you have something concrete to offer, let's say you want to mentor, or you have some knowledge, know-how that you want to share, reach out, startuprefugees.com. You can find our contacts there. We organize lots of different workshops and events for our customers, or like the target group, refugees and asylum seekers and other migrants. And we very much welcome anyone who actually feels that they have something concrete, know-how, knowledge. Or then, if you work in a big organization, maybe you want to actually become our partner, do reach out. We have different partnership packages, and we've worked a lot with, for example, companies like Tieto Every, Reactor, IKEA, Netlight, Ecovilla. So we are always open to welcome new companies to join.
Fantastic. I am going to encourage anybody who's interested to reach out. And, if you want to follow Aicha or Startup Refugees on, I know they're on social media,
LinkedIn,
various
maybe, yeah.
platforms and such. Um, I definitely follow and am inspired quite often by the things you all post. So thank you for being in my day. Thank you for being in my ecosystem and for making this place
Thank you.
better through being in it.
Thank
You
you.
have a great
You're
day.
wonderful. Yes, thank you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.